North Dakota Territory, October 1878. Axel Thorson was building a chimney without a fireplace, or that is what it looked like to the men who gathered to watch him work. He stood on the crude scaffolding, 3 stories above the prairie grass, fitting a pane of glass into a south-facing wall. Below him, his structure was a narrow, vertical absurdity. It was 3 tiny rooms, each no more than 12 feet square, stacked one on top of the other like a child's forgotten blocks. It towered over the low, sensible sod houses and log cabins of the settlement, a lone finger of wood pointing at an unforgiving sky. From the ground, the muttering was audible. These were seasoned men who knew the physics of survival in this place. They knew that heat rose and was lost. They knew that height was a fool's game, an invitation for the winter wind to tear a home apart. They knew glass was a sieve for warmth, a luxury that bled a man's woodpile dry for a sliver of light. And here was Axel Thorson, the quiet Norwegian shipwright who had arrived only a year prior, building a house that violated every one of those hard-won truths. He was building tall. He was building small rooms that seemed impossible to live in. And he was crowning his folly with the largest pane of glass anyone had ever seen outside of a storefront in Bismarck. They had a name for it. At the trading post, over lukewarm coffee, they called it Thorson's Folly, a monument to a newcomer's ignorance, a wooden tomb for his young family. Axel heard the whispers. He saw the slow shakes of the head. He did not argue. He just kept working, his hammer blows precise and methodical. He was not building a house as they understood it. He was building an engine designed to run on the very cold that they all feared. What did this quiet man, this builder of seafaring vessels, understand about thermodynamics that every experienced prairie farmer and builder had missed? He understood that you didn't just fight the cold. You had to make the cold work for you. His foolish-looking tower was designed to do just that, and the coming winter would be its final, brutal test. Stay with me to see how this bizarre structure not only worked, but redefined survival on the northern plains. And if you believe in the power of unconventional thinking, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think he's really building. To understand the madness of Axel's design, one must first understand the tyranny of a Dakota winter. It was not merely cold, it was an active, malevolent force, a presence that sought to invade, to steal, to extinguish. Winter began as a whisper in late October, a sharpening of the wind's edge. By November, it was a constant pressure. The sun, a pale disk in a steel-gray sky, offered light but no warmth. The land became a single, unbroken expanse of white and gray, the horizon blurring into a frozen haze. The very air grew thin and sharp, hurting to breathe. For the settlers, life contracted into a single, desperate battle for BTUS. The standard dwelling was a fortress, built low to the ground to shrug off the wind. It was often a sod house, its thick earthen walls providing immense insulation. Or it was a log cabin, its gaps chinked with a mixture of mud, moss, and animal hair that was in a constant state of cracking and repair. Inside, the centerpiece of life was the cast-iron stove. It was a hungry god, demanding a constant tribute of cottonwood and oak. The daily rhythm was dictated by its needs. A man's wealth in winter was not measured in dollars or acres, but in the size of his woodpile. To run out of wood was to die. Yet, even with the stove burning day and night, true warmth was a fantasy. The laws of physics were cruel. Hot air rose, pooling uselessly against the low ceiling, while a bitter, ankle-high river of cold air flowed across the floor. Families lived in layers of wool and fur, even indoors. They slept, buried under a mound of quilts and animal pelts, their breath crystallizing in the air above them. A cup of water left on a table overnight would be a solid block of ice by morning. Ink froze in its wells. The rime of frost that formed on the inside of the walls would grow thicker each day, a beautiful, deadly latticework. The very nails in the walls would become conduits of cold, gathering their own white crowns of ice. The failure of this conventional wisdom was not in its intention, but in its understanding of the enemy. The settlers built to trap heat. They saw warmth as a finite resource to be hoarded. They viewed the outside world as a single, monolithic enemy to be walled off. Axel Thorson saw it differently. His entire life had been spent working with the dynamics of pressure and flow. On the coast of Norway, he had not built houses, but ships. A ship's hull was a world unto itself, a sealed system designed to resist the immense, crushing pressure of the sea. It had to be strong, but it also had to be smart. He had learned how air moved within a contained vessel. He knew that moisture was as great an enemy as the cold, leading to rot and sickness. He knew that a poorly ventilated ship was a death trap. Most importantly, he understood that temperature was not a static thing to be trapped, but a current to be directed. When he looked at a prairie cabin, he didn't see a shelter. He saw a leaky container. He saw the immense energy generated by the stove, energy paid for in sweat and saw blades, rising directly to the ceiling and bleeding out through the roof. He saw the cold air seeping in through 1,000 tiny gaps in the floor and walls, creating a constant, energy-sapping convection cycle that did nothing but chill the inhabitants. The settlers were trying to heat a box that was actively working to cool itself. Axel knew he could not stop the cold from coming, but he believed he could tell it where to go. He knew he could not stop the heat from rising, but he believed he could capture it, store it, and make it do useful work. His tower was not an act of ignorance. It was the application of a shipwright's logic to a prairie problem. His build began in the late summer, and from the first day, it was a spectacle. He did not dig a wide, shallow foundation. He dug a deep, square pit, lining it with fieldstone. This would be the base of his engine. The first floor rose from this pit. The community watched, perplexed. The walls were stout, made of thick-hewn cottonwood logs, but the space they enclosed was tiny, a mere 12 feet by 12 feet. The ceiling was oppressively low, barely 6.5 feet high. It was more of a cellar than a room. "A man can't stand up straight in there, Thorson," one neighbor had commented, leaning on the half-finished wall. Axel simply nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "A tall man will have to watch his head." This first room, he explained to no one, was the engine room. Its purpose was singular, to house the heat source. He installed a small, efficient cast-iron stove directly in the center of the packed earth floor. The room's small volume and low ceiling were intentional. It was designed to become superheated with minimal fuel, concentrating the thermal energy in a small, controllable space. There was no wasted volume to heat. Every BTU would be put to work. Then came the second story, and the confusion in the settlement deepened. It was the same 12 by 12 footprint, but the construction was different. He built a double wall, a frame of wood on the inside and another on the outside, leaving a gap of nearly a foot between them. Day after day, his wagon returned from the fields, loaded with rocks and freshly cut sod. He meticulously packed this space between the walls, creating an insulating layer of incredible thickness. The floor of this second level was the most curious part. He laid thick joists, then covered them not with floorboards, but with a bed of flat stones and packed earth, nearly a foot deep. It was an immense weight, requiring him to double the support beams below. This was the battery. Axel knew that wood and air heat up quickly, but they also cool down quickly. Stone and earth, however, possess high thermal mass. They are slow to warm, but once heated, they are incredibly slow to cool. This entire second floor was designed to be a massive, passive heat sink. It was a sponge that would soak up the rising warmth from the engine room below and hold it for hours, radiating it out slowly and evenly. Finally, he began the third floor. This was to be their actual living space. It was here, high above the ground, that his wife, Elara, would cook, and his two small children, Lars and Sophia, would play. It was this decision that truly cemented his reputation as a fool. Silas Blackwood arrived on the day Axel began framing the south-facing window. Silas was the region's most respected builder. A man from Ohio, he had built more than half the cabins in the settlement. His joints were tight, his roofs didn't leak, and his advice was considered gospel. He was not a malicious man, but he was a practical one, and what he saw troubled him deeply. He stood with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the enormous opening Axel was creating. "Thorson," he began, his voice laced with genuine concern. "What are you doing?" "Putting in a window, Mr. Blackwood," Axel replied, not pausing his work. "A window that size will be the death of you," Silas stated, his tone flat and certain. "That glass will get so cold it will suck every bit of warmth out of this room. You'll have ice an inch thick on the inside of it come January. You are building a window to the grave." Axel stopped his hammering and looked down at the older man. "In my country, the winter sun is weak, but it is still a source of heat. We learn to capture it." Silas scoffed, a rare breach of his stoic demeanor. "This isn't Norway. The sun here has no power in winter. All that glass will do is lose heat 100 times faster than a solid wall. You're fighting a losing battle." He then gestured at the tower itself. "And all your heat from that little stove downstairs? It's going to rush straight up here to the highest point and leak out your roof. You'll be freezing on the first floor, while the ceiling of this room is warm enough for flies. It's bad design, man. It's just wrong." The logic was sound. It was the logic of the prairie. Every man listening nodded in agreement. Silas Blackwood had just articulated what they all felt. Axel's reply was quiet, almost a whisper against the wind. "The heat has to go somewhere. I want to tell it where to go." Silas just shook his head and walked away. The verdict had been delivered. Thorson's folly was not just foolish, it was a death trap, certified by the best builder they had. The mockery at the trading post became more pointed. Men would ask Axel if he was planning to sell tickets to watch his family freeze. They joked that his house was so tall he'd be the first to know when spring arrived. Through it all, Axel remained placid, his face unreadable. He finished the window, sealing the expensive pane of glass with pitch and tar, a shipwright's trick to ensure a perfect, airtight seal. By the time the first snows fell, the folly was complete. A strange, three-tiered structure that looked utterly alien on the flat prairie. Inside, the system was ready. It was an integrated whole, a thermal machine designed to perform a simple, elegant cycle. The cycle began in the engine room. The small stove would burn a small, steady fire. The concentrated heat would warm the air in the tiny room. This superheated air, desperate to rise, would travel up through a single, large, grated opening in the ceiling. It would then enter the second floor, the battery. Here the hot air would circulate, warming the thick earth and stone floor and the packed walls. The thermal mass would slowly, steadily absorb this energy, like a battery charging with electricity. The air, having given up some of its heat, would continue its journey upward. Finally, it would enter the third-floor living space. This room was the cleverest part of the design. During the day, the massive south-facing window, now an enemy, according to Silas Blackwood, would become an asset. Even the weak winter sun, when focused through glass into a well-insulated space, generates heat. This is the greenhouse effect. This solar gain would provide a secondary, free source of heat at the highest point of the house, warming the air and the wooden floors. At night, or on cloudy days, the system would reverse. The stove would still provide the primary heat, but now, the charged battery on the second floor would begin to slowly release its stored thermal energy. It would radiate warmth upwards into the living space and downwards into the engine room, creating a remarkably stable temperature throughout the entire structure. The house would, in effect, be heating itself from its own core. It was a lung, breathing in heat, holding it, and exhaling it slowly. A closed loop of convection and radiation. A design born not of ignorance, but of a profound and different understanding. The question was, would it be enough? December came, and the whispers of winter became a roar. The first blizzard was a rehearsal, lasting 2 days and dropping the temperature to 0. The settlers hunkered down, feeding their stoves, stuffing rags into the ever-present drafts. Inside the folly, Axel's family lived in a strange comfort. The stove on the first floor consumed half the wood of his neighbors, yet the temperature on the third floor never dropped below 60 degrees. But that was just a test. The true examination was yet to come. It arrived in the second week of January. The old-timers called it a white hurricane. For 3 days prior, the sky had been a strange, luminous gray, and the air held a dead, still cold. There was no wind. The smoke from chimneys rose in perfect, undisturbed columns. Experienced settlers looked at that sky with a primal fear. It was the calm that preceded a cataclysm. The temperature at dawn on the first day was 10 degrees below 0. By sunset, the thermometer read 20 below. The wind arrived just after dark, a low moan from the northwest that grew steadily into a shrieking physical force. Then, the snow began. It was not the gentle snow of postcards. It was fine and hard, like airborne sand, driven almost horizontally by the wind. Visibility dropped to 0. A man could not see his own hand in front of his face. The world beyond one's four walls ceased to exist, replaced by a screaming white void. For the community, the ordeal began. The wind was a living thing, a predator searching for any weakness. It forced the needle-like snow through the tiniest cracks in the walls, around window frames and under doors. Inside the cabins, little drifts of snow began to form along the baseboards. The stoves, which had been hungry before, became insatiable. Men were making the perilous journey to their woodpiles every hour, returning caked in snow, their beards frozen solid, the wood they carried seeming to vanish into the fire with no effect. The cabins were consuming fuel at a terrifying, unsustainable rate. Inside, the battle was being lost. Despite the roaring fires, the indoor temperatures plummeted. Water barrels, kept near the stove, began to freeze over at the edges, then inwards, until they were solid blocks of ice. Families abandoned the corners of their single-room cabins, huddling together in a small circle of meager warmth around the stove. They ate cold rations, as cooking became a secondary concern to simply feeding the fire. Livestock, caught in their barns, began to die, their bodies freezing solid where they stood. Silas Blackwood found himself in a state of professional and personal crisis. His cabin was the best built in the settlement. The logs were perfectly scribed. The chinking was fresh and thick. The foundation was solid. By all accounts, his family should have been the most secure. But his expertise was useless against this onslaught. The wind, which he had so confidently predicted would harass Axel's tall house, was tearing at his own low roof. It was creating a pressure differential that was actively sucking the warm air up his chimney. He could feel the cold pouring in from the floor, a relentless tide that the fire could not hold back. He stuffed quilts against the door. He and his wife spent hours melting snow for drinking water as their barrel was frozen through. The frost on the walls had crept down to waist height. He looked at his son, huddled under a pile of blankets, his face pale and shivering, and felt a cold deeper than the wind. He was failing. His knowledge, his experience, his entire system of belief, it was all failing. And in that cold, desperate moment, his thoughts turned to the Norwegian, to Thorson's folly. He pictured the thin walls, the towering profile, the absurd pane of glass. He imagined the family inside, frozen and still. A grim, terrible guilt washed over him. He had not just doubted, he had mocked. He had stood by and watched a man build a tomb, and he had done nothing but offer scorn, whether out of guilt or a morbid curiosity to confirm his own predictions. He knew he had to go. He had to see. The journey to Axel's cabin was a battle for every foot. It was only 300 yards, a distance he could walk in 2 minutes on a clear day. In the blizzard, it took him nearly 20. He wrapped his face in wool, pulled his hat down low, and tied a rope from his door to the fence line, so he could find his way back. The moment he stepped outside, the force of the wind staggered him. It was a solid wall of motion, filled with blinding, stinging ice. He leaned into it, following the rope hand over hand, his body already protesting the vicious cold. He could see nothing. He navigated by memory and the feel of the rope. He stumbled, fell to his knees, and pushed himself back up, his resolve hardening. He had to know. Finally, his outstretched hand hit something solid. Wood. He had reached the wall of the folly. He followed it around, searching for the door, his gloved hands fumbling against the frozen timbers. He saw a faint, yellow light high above him. It was the third-floor window. It wasn't covered in ice. It was glowing. He found the door and pounded on it with the heel of his hand, the sound swallowed by the storm. He pounded again, shouting Axel's name. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, he heard the sound of a bar being lifted from inside. The door swung inward, and Silas Blackwood was hit by a physical force. It was not a blast of wind or a flurry of snow. It was a wave of heat. It was a silent, dry, enveloping warmth that seemed to push the cold away from his body. It was a warmth that carried the scent of baking bread and fresh coffee. He stumbled inside, pulling the door shut against the raging storm, and stood there, blinking, utterly disoriented. He was in the engine room. The little stove in the center of the room was glowing with a soft red light, but it was not roaring. It was burning with a quiet, steady efficiency. The air was warm and still. He looked up. Axel was coming down the ladder from the second floor. He was in his shirt sleeves. "Mr. Blackwood," Axel said, his voice calm, "it is a bad night to be out." Silas could not speak. He unwrapped the frozen scarf from his face, his eyes taking in the impossible scene. He could hear the laughter of children from the floor above. Laughter. On a night like this. "Come up," Axel said, gesturing towards the ladder. "Elara has coffee." Silas climbed, his movements stiff and clumsy. He emerged into the second floor, the battery. He placed a hand on the packed earth wall. It was not cold. He pressed his palm flat against it. It was faintly, unmistakably warm. He felt a deep, resonant warmth radiating from the very floor beneath his feet. He continued to the third floor, his heart pounding. And there, the full force of his error was laid bare. The room was bathed in the warm, gentle light of 2 oil lamps. Elara Thorson stood by a small counter, kneading dough, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. In the center of the room, on a clean-scrubbed wooden floor, her 2 children, Lars and Sophia, were playing with wooden blocks. They were barefoot. Silas stared at their bare feet. It was an image so profoundly wrong, so contrary to the reality of the storm outside, that his mind struggled to process it. He looked at the walls. They were clean, bare wood. There was no frost, not a speck of white on the walls, not a single crystal of ice on the nail heads. His gaze was drawn inevitably to the great south-facing window. It was a clear black pane, looking out into the swirling chaos. There was no condensation, no sheet of ice. He could see the blizzard raging, but he could not hear it. The house was strangely, peacefully silent. He was a builder, an expert. His professional instincts took over, a desperate attempt to find a rational explanation. He walked to the north wall, the wall that took the full brunt of the wind. He pressed his hand against it. It was warm, warmer even than the wall on the second floor. He turned back to Axel. "The stove," he said, his voice hoarse. "How much wood have you burned?" Axel shrugged. "A little. I put 4 logs in after supper. It is time for one more soon." 4 logs. Silas had burned through half a cord in the last 24 hours. He was feeding his stove a dozen logs every 2 hours, a frantic, losing effort. The wood box next to Axel's ladder was still more than 3/4 full. The numbers were undeniable. They were a hammer blow to his lifetime of certainty. His eyes fell on a small mercury thermometer hanging on the wall. He walked over to it, his boots heavy on the warm floor. The red line was clear and steady. It read, 74 degrees. "What is the temperature outside, Axel?" Silas asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The last time I checked, it was 22 below zero," Axel replied. "It may be colder now." A 96-degree difference. In a wooden house, with a giant window, in the middle of a historic blizzard. It was not just impossible. It was a miracle. Silas Blackwood, the most respected builder in the territory, the man whose word was law, finally turned to face the quiet Norwegian shipwright. He looked at Axel's calm face, at his comfortable family, at the warm, safe room that defied all logic. The arrogance, the certainty, the pity he had felt for this man, it all crumbled to dust, replaced by a profound and humbling awe. "I was wrong," Silas said. The words came out heavy, thick with the weight of his shattered worldview. "Axel, I was completely wrong. This works. My God, this works." He took a step closer, his expression shifting from shock to an urgent, desperate curiosity. "You have to teach me. You have to show me how." The storm raged for another full day, but inside Thorson's folly, life continued in its warm, peaceful rhythm. When the wind finally died down and the snow stopped, the settlers emerged from their cabins like survivors from a shipwreck. The landscape was transformed, buried under massive drifts. The first priority was checking on neighbors. The story spread quickly, carried first by a humbled and awestruck Silas Blackwood. He told everyone what he had seen: barefoot children, a man in his shirt sleeves, a thermometer reading 74 degrees. He spoke of the tiny, steady fire and the nearly full wood box. At first they didn't believe him. They thought the ordeal had shaken his mind. So they went to see for themselves. In 2s and 3s, they made the trek to the strange tower that pierced the snow-covered prairie. Axel welcomed them all. They stepped inside and felt the same wave of warmth that had stunned Silas. They climbed the ladders, their faces etched with disbelief. They touched the warm walls. They stood before the great window, looking out at the frozen world from a place of impossible comfort. They saw the proof with their own eyes. The mockery died overnight, replaced by a torrent of questions. Thorson's folly was never uttered again. Instead, they began to call it the Thorson Stack. Replication began that very spring. Led by Silas Blackwood, who had become Axel's most devoted student and advocate, the settlers started to build anew. Silas, with his practical builder's knowledge, helped translate Axel's shipwright's intuition into a set of principles that others could follow. They built new homes and retrofitted old ones. They added second and third stories. They learned to build the thermal battery, packing walls and floors with the very earth and stone they had in abundance. The south-facing window, once a symbol of foolishness, became the signature feature of the new design. The community was transformed. The following winters were still harsh, but the desperate life-or-death struggle for warmth was gone. The insatiable hunger of the stoves was tamed. A family's woodpile, which once represented a single season of survival, could now last 2 or 3. Axel Thorson became a quiet legend. He never sought fame or payment for his knowledge. He would simply walk to a neighbor's new construction site, offer a few quiet words of advice on airflow or sealing a joint, and then return to his own work. His role was that of the innovator, not the leader. He had solved the problem for his family, and in doing so, had offered a solution to them all. The real impact was not measured in degrees on a thermometer or in cords of wood saved. It was measured in human lives. It was measured in the babies who survived their first winter, in the elderly who were no longer found frozen in their beds. It was measured in the simple, profound dignity of a family able to move freely in their own home, their children able to play on the floor without fear of the cold. It was the quiet triumph of an idea that turned a shelter from a leaky box into a living, breathing engine for warmth. The story of Axel Thorson and his folly is a powerful reminder of a timeless lesson. It demonstrates how a fresh perspective, born from a different set of experiences, can solve problems that have stumped conventional wisdom for generations. The established experts saw only a house built wrong. The shipwright saw a system that could manage energy, directing the flow of heat and cold, just as he would direct the flow of water around a hull. His solution was not based on new materials or complex technology. It was based on a deeper understanding of the fundamental principles of physics: convection, thermal mass, and solar gain. These are the very same principles that underlie modern passive solar design and energy-efficient construction. The Thorson stack was, in its own way, a forerunner of the passive house, a structure designed to work with its environment, not just fight against it. It's a testament to the idea that sometimes the most revolutionary innovations come from outsiders, from those who are not blinded by the way things have always been done. If this story of quiet genius has changed how you think about solving problems, hit that like button to let us know. Subscribe for more stories of forgotten frontier wisdom, and drop a comment below telling us about the coldest winter you've ever had to face. The account you have just heard is a fictionalized narrative created for educational and entertainment purposes. While the engineering and physics principles discussed, such as the stack effect, thermal mass, and passive solar gain, are very real and have been used in historical and modern construction, the specific characters, names, and events depicted in this story are products of imagination. This content is intended to illustrate historical concepts and should not be taken as professional architectural or engineering advice.